Good morning and welcome to Retirement Tax Matters. I'm Adam Reed. This is Garrett Crawford, our resident CFP, and we're back with another hard-hitting episode of things you can expect to plan through, think through, tax return-driven financial planning, kind of all the fun stuff.
Quality content.
Quality content. And speaking of quality, some new mic arms. I'm just going to call it out. I'm sure all the weekly listeners on YouTube, at least, if you're on Spotify or Apple Music, you got to come check out YouTube for a week. We've got new microphones and kind of upgraded a little bit of our setup. So changing the world over here.
Yeah, we've kind of had this idea, just get, a lot like financial planning, retirement planning, you do little steps, make improvements. And so it'll be fun. We have one decoration on the wall in the back. Who knows what will happen next week. You'll have to look for our 1% difference every week.
The one little add-on. I told Garrett, I said, we need to be careful, though, because we could end up like my grandma, like one little thing every year ends up at the end of 85 years of life. You got a house full of all these things. So
we have a saying in our house, you got to know when to stop.
Yep, you got to know when to pump the brakes. So. Yeah. Well, thank y'all for joining us again, wherever you're listening from. I know we talk a lot about tax return-driven financial planning and how to kind of ease those feelings of the IRS. Are they going to be my biggest beneficiary in retirement? And how do we make those efficiencies to make sure that our money is directed to the people we want it to go to in the most efficient way possible? And one of the ways that we talk about that, one of the trumpets that we sound all the time, the kind of the heart blood of a lot of what we talk about, at least right now in the landscape that we're in 2026, is Roth conversions.
Oh, yeah.
And they're a great way, great thing to inherit, kind of a great way to move income around at different times in life at efficient times. And so if you've been listening along and maybe you've consumed other content, maybe you've just been chomping at the bit and this is your year, you say, man, 2026 is the year I'm going to do that big Roth conversion. I've always been hearing about it, thinking about it. And you get ready and you say, all right, I'm going to do it. And then you're sitting there and you think, wait, how do I do it? Like, what is the ins and outs of that? And so, Garrett and I were thinking for this week, it might be nice to just sit down and talk about, hey, we know the why behind Roth conversions, but how do I actually execute on those?
That's a great introduction because I feel like, a lot of my time as a financial planner is spent helping clients see the benefits of a Roth conversion. And it usually ends up, well, how do I actually do a Roth conversion? I mean, it's not rocket science, but if you've never done one before, it can be tricky. And so I think, one of the things I like about what we're doing is we're trying to build a resource library for retirees between $2 million and $8 million. And each of these episodes, really the idea is these are things that Adam and I are interacting with clients about all the time. And so we just want to have a public conversation, a depository of great client resources and retiree resources. And so what better way than to do a quick episode this morning about that conversation that I have with a lot of clients of how do we do a Roth conversion? And I think specifically for this episode, we want to talk about how we pay the estimated tax of a Roth conversion. So you don't get to do a Roth conversion for free. So how do we pay taxes associated with a Roth conversion?
Right. So how does it work? How do the ins and outs go? How do I make sure I'm not in trouble at the end of the year if I've not paid taxes or done it wrong? And so I think that's a good segue into kind of there's an efficient way and there's a simple way. There's a strategic way, maybe a simple way is a good way to put it, to pay the tax bill for a Roth conversion. So could you maybe touch on each of those routes, maybe the pros and cons of each?
So, this is one of those things, it's there's by the book, and then there's like actually working with real people that have differing opinions on things. And I know early in my career, the answer as a financial planner is if you want to do a Roth conversion, it usually makes the most sense to pay for the taxes associated with the conversion with outside funds. And so we're going to talk about what I just said, and we're going to dive into that in a second. But let's start just a few steps back, and let's talk about very basic Roth conversion tax conversation. So when you move money from a traditional IRA over to a Roth IRA, that's a Roth conversion. You're moving it from something you haven't paid taxes on into an account where it gets to grow tax-free for the rest of your lifetime. If you're married, the rest of your spouse's lifetime, and if you have kids, an additional 10 years after you die. We've done a different episode on that. But when you do a Roth conversion, and let's just say you did a $100,000 Roth conversion and you're in a 24% tax bracket and it stays in that tax bracket, just to keep math simple, that means you're going to owe $24,000 additionally in federal income tax at the end of the year. And so it's great to do a Roth conversion, but the question becomes, how am I going to pay that $24,000 tax bill? And so there's, as you said, the kind of smart financial planning savvy way to do this, and then there's also the easy way. And so as an early financial planner, the answer is always we want to keep as much money in the Roth IRA as possible so that money can grow tax-free. And so for a high net worth retiree who has outside money, a lot of times it's going to make the most sense if you did a $100,000 Roth conversion, have a $24,000 tax bill, not to use some of that $100,000 in the Roth conversion to pay the taxes, but instead take other money that you have, whether that's in a brokerage investment account, whether that's in your bank account. But for simplicity right now, if you had $24,000 in your checking account, it'd be better to pay that $24,000 tax liability through an estimated payment on the IRS website at the time of conversion. And by doing it that way, you end up with a full $100,000 in the Roth IRA that's this tax-free engine that grows the rest of your life and your spouse's life and 10 additional years for your children's lives. And so that can be really powerful if you have outside funds to pay for that tax bill. And so that's all and great, but then there's also the people that don't like the idea of taking the money that they've saved in their bank account and paying that tax liability, but they're still compelled by the idea of a Roth conversion. And so the easier way would be if you just withheld, in this example, 24% of that $100,000 Roth conversion. So I've done this before. It's very simple, but whenever I submit instructions in for a Roth conversion, I just tell Charles Schwab to withhold $24,000 from the Roth conversion, and instead of $100,000 going into the Roth IRA, only $76,000 goes into the IRA. But you don't have to worry about making an estimated tax payment. Maybe you hate technology. Maybe you hate the IRS website. Maybe the pain of writing a check is too much, but you're convinced of the benefits. But it's really simple. You tell me how much you want withheld, and then we end up with money in a Roth conversion. And so those are two different ways. I would probably argue for the niche of this podcast, if you're a high net worth retiree between $2 million and $8 million, and the Roth conversion amounts that you'd usually be seeing on an annual basis, if you've got outside funds, that's the way that I would do that. The person that would want to do a federal withholding would be somebody that has very little liquidity, which very well could be somebody listening to this, or they just don't want to deal with making an estimated tax payment.
Well, and it's funny too. We said there was kind of the strategic way and the simple way. In our household, I need a T-shirt that says this. I've said it like 6 episodes in a row. My dad's a CPA, and we always joke that complexity is job security.
Yeah.
And nothing's ever simple in finance, right? Even when we say the simple way. And so there is kind of one little bugaboo thing that can trip you up if you do the withholding. It may not be super pertinent to a lot of people that are listening if they're already retired or almost into retirement, but there is a 59.5 age requirement to do the federal withholding on that. And so that is the one kind of, I guess, snafu thing to be aware of if you're looking kind of down that route to do the federal tax withholding.
Yeah, and so I think a lot of people, maybe you're taking a sabbatical year, your income drops, and you're thinking about a Roth conversion, and maybe you want to do a $150,000 Roth conversion. If you're younger than 59.5, that's a danger zone. Don't do the federal withholding. You're going to end up with a additional 10% penalty on the amount that you withhold. And so I think for most people that's usually not a huge issue, but at the same time it's a really important rule to bring up. Yeah, so glad you did that.
And then so I think, and you mentioned this, but so we kind of squared away federal tax withholding. I think most people understand that to some extent. They've done that through their paycheck all these years, and okay, it makes sense. We're moving money over. We just send that off. I never even see it. The money lands there. Let's double click on the paying the tax bill and estimated payment. I found that sometimes when I call a client and I say, hey, you got a 20, we're going to do this Roth conversion. They've agreed to. We're not doing it behind their back. I mean, it's not like, surprise, we're doing a Roth conversion, but they're on board. We're doing a Roth conversion. And I call and say, okay, hey, if we want to pay the estimated tax and make this as efficient as possible, we need $20,000. And they go, oof. And they're kind of bummed. They're like, man, my savings, it was just kind of at that nice round number I liked. I don't really want to see it go down and then have to build it back up. And I think one of the cool things that we remind a lot of our clients, business owners, people through the years that have maxed out 401ks, other things, they built up a pretty decent little brokerage account.
Oh, yeah.
And so maybe help me understand, help our clients understand, help people listening understand, how can they utilize that brokerage account to maybe, if they want to go that more strategic route, but not dip into their savings at the bank?
Yeah, so I tell people this a lot, that brokerage account that you have, that non-IRA investment account, it's like one of the most complicated tax investment vehicles that you own. And a lot of people will resonate with this. If you have an IRA, or especially if you're retired and you're receiving distributions, we're filming this in February, and so we're a couple weeks after a lot of our clients have gotten 1099-R distribution forms, and they're like 1 or 2 pages. It shows how much came out, and that's how much you report as taxable income. But if you have a brokerage account individually or jointly, maybe with a spouse, you get those tax forms, and they're like that thick. I think some of ours are like 30 or 40 pages. And
last year we got a few clients. Schwab sent out some corrected 1099s.
Oh yeah,
and it was like a needle in a haystack trying to find the spot that was corrected, because it'd be like one number on page 38.
Yeah.
So it's no joke.
And so if you have one of those accounts, you can resonate that those are thicker. And the reason that is that it gets everything that you own can be taxed a little differently. Maybe it's maybe you have qualified dividends that are taxed at one rate. Maybe you have ordinary dividends that are taxed at one rate. Maybe you have securities that you've sold for long-term capital gains, which would be different than your ordinary income rate. Maybe you have some type of gold. They have a special capital gain rate for collectibles. I think it's like 26 or 28%. I can't remember off the top of my head. But the reason it's so much thicker is that you can own so many different things in an investment account like that they have to do individual reporting for all of those different investment types. And for the person that doesn't love TurboTax or doesn't love tax planning like you and I, there can be this question, okay, so I'm doing a Roth conversion. I need money for taxes. It's usually simpler if they have that in their bank account, but I would argue that probably a lot of people listening to this probably have a brokerage account like this, and that can be a wonderful place to sell some positions for long-term capital gains. Maybe that's 15% and your ordinary income rate is 32%, or maybe you might have something called the net investment income tax that applies. But generally speaking, you can get money out of that brokerage account pretty tax efficiently, and that is usually my go-to place to sell some positions in order to generate the cash needed for the Roth conversion. And so why is that the preferred method? Because money that goes into a Roth IRA via a Roth conversion, that money is growing tax-free for the rest of your life. The money that you leave inside of your brokerage account at Schwab or Fidelity and is growing, that growth is going to be taxed. And so if this would be the argument for what we do here, tax return driven financial planning. If you have a tax preparer that's really good at what they do, and you have a financial planner that can help you assist in some of these things, the way I look at it is, as a financial planner, client needs to do this. I'll look and see all the different positions they own, long-term, short-term, unrealized, realized. I'll check and see where their income is at the time of the Roth conversion is needed. And we will factor that in to the December 31st planning by the end of the year, so that we know that we won't end up tripping an additional Medicare IRMA premium. We'll know if the net investment income tax applies. And really, at the end of the day, we're trying to avoid surprises and unintended consequences from a Roth conversion. And so the paying of the taxes of the Roth conversion is a critical step, but if you zoom out a little bit, a Roth conversion can raise incomes in a way that could cause your Medicare premiums to go up. And so the maybe one other thing that I'd like to mention here is a lot of you may end up getting a big refund at the end of the year. So I laugh. I've met a lot of people through the years, husband and wife, they have differing opinions on how come they get a refund every year and we end up having to pay in. And I won't go into that conversation today. But if you're used to getting a big refund every year and you're thinking about Roth conversion taxes, let's say you usually overpay because you're conservative, you don't want to end up with a surprise, and maybe you average a $10,000 refund. If you're thinking during the Roth conversion planning, and especially if it's near the end of the year, you could factor in that $10,000 refund and make a smaller payment for your Roth conversion. And so I think we may be talking about the underpayment penalty next, but before we do that, I would just say there's a place here for having the accountant or the tax preparer to come in alongside a financial planner and help you avoid surprises and surprise tax bills come the following April.
Which I think is a great callback to last week, where we talked about, last 2 weeks actually, where we talked about how good synergy from the people at the table, your financial advisors, whether that's accountant, CPA, tax preparer, financial advisor, whoever that may be, when those people are synced up, there's some really cool planning opportunities and some really good optimizations that go above and beyond just, hey, my guys picked some good stocks and things are growing, and that goes beyond, well, my tax preparer, he signed off.
And I would even say, since we've recorded last episode, it's sunk even deeper for me. There's all that stuff, but then there's I just don't have to think about it anymore. It's like one less brick in my backpack that I have to carry around. So, this is what we do, but at the same time, we would say that to anybody working with any financial planner or tax preparer. Have them, if you're paying them, use them. Make your life better, easier.
Yeah, put them to work. Put us to work.
Yeah.
So, and I think you touched on this underpayment penalty, maybe another pain point maybe for people, or a reason it's like, I'm kind of leaning towards the Roth or the federal tax withholding with the Roth conversion. Can you touch on safe harbor and how that kind of interacts there, and how people should maybe think about those estimated payments and worrying about underpayment penalties as they're looking at Roth conversions?
Yeah, so this is the most complicated, touchy spot for me as the financial planner, because, in one sense, you need to make sure you understand this. This is where you could end up with a little surprise on your tax bill that you were not expecting. And on the other side, anecdotally from my experience, whenever an underpayment penalty has applied or come up, it's the dire consequences of this underpayment penalty have not been large, and most clients go, So you
haven't had any clients, the IRS didn't kick down their door and drag them off to federal prison or anything?
Well, so the idea is nobody likes to hand out free money with no interest earned, and the IRS is like that. They don't want you to defer. Well, maybe a good example would be, what if you did your Roth conversion on January 1st of this year, and then you don't get around to paying the taxes on that Roth conversion until April of the following year? So we're talking like 13
months,
13, 14, 15 months. They're basically not, they want you to have some liability tax-wise if you're going to do something like that. And so an underpayment penalty just means that you effectively did something on your tax return where you created a tax liability, but you deferred paying that for too long. And so this could be a whole podcast episode, but a couple things I would say. When you've heard that term, paying your estimated taxes, it's like the quarterly tax payments. The idea there is that for people that have volatile income, business owners, your income fluctuates, your accountant may have asked you to make quarterly payments. And the idea behind the quarterly payments is that if you make these quarterly deposits to the IRS, you can avoid this underpayment tax penalty, which the last time I looked, it actually is kind of significant. It can be up to, I think, this was a couple of years ago I looked at it, but I think it was like 2% per quarter that you were delinquent on paying taxes. So that used to be, before COVID and inflation hit, it used to be like 1% or less than 1%. So it really wasn't even that consequential. But now this is an important part of Roth conversion planning, that you're paying those taxes on time. And so the main situation we're trying to avoid is a Roth conversion that happens in January, and then you don't pay taxes on it till much, much later. And so one cool fact, and I say verify this with your tax preparer, but if you do federal withholding from a Roth conversion, so we're back to the IRA, you do a $100,000 Roth conversion, you withhold 24%. My understanding is that federal holding, even if you did it on December 31st at the end of the year, it applies like you gave it to the IRS on January 1st. So that's a pretty cool feature of a IRA withholding. You do end up with less in the Roth, but it gets applied towards the whole year. And so maybe you need to take an RMD, something like that. That could be an interesting way to do it. But I'm not sure that would outweigh the long-term benefits of having a lot more money, the extra $24,000 in the Roth IRA. And so back to $2 to $8 million high net worth retiree listening to this conversation, I would generally lean towards a estimated tax payment on the Roth conversion. I would cover my bases here and say, if you have a tax preparer, you're paying them, have them tell you how much you should pay and when. They'll give you a voucher. You can make an estimated payment. But if I'm just stepping back generally, if I have a client that's doing a Roth conversion, I kind of want them to take care of that liability then and there, because I used to say, hey, if you want to take care of that later, you can. Here are the issues. And then by the time tax time rolls around, they've got a $15,000, $20,000.
We've slept a couple times.
And they're like, Garrett, what did you do? And we have to rehash this conversation. So I've learned as a practicing financial planner, even if they are covered under the safe harbor rules, we don't know where the market is going. And so I just like to counsel my clients when we do it. If you have a tax preparer, talk to them. But if you want to make this decision yourself, I would go ahead and mentally calculate what my tax liability is going to be and go ahead and hop on the IRS website and make an estimated payment. And most importantly, do not forget about that estimated payment when you go to pay your tax return. Hopefully you won't forget that. But long story short, Roth conversions are amazing. It's the financial planner's greatest tool, but we need to make sure that we are paying attention to the taxes that are due. None of this is hard. It just takes time and attention to make sure that you don't end up with a big tax bill at the turn of the new year.
Absolutely. Well, I think that should give us some insight in how Roth conversions work, kind of the behind the scenes. It's a big topic, so I'm sure there'll be more episodes down the road and kind of what that looks like. And I guess to actually initiate one, reach out to your custodian if you're a DIY person. Or
everything that we just talked about can be taken care of on a Roth conversion form. Federal withholding 0%, and then if you're going to make a estimated tax payment from like a brokerage account, you just want to initiate a distribution to your bank account, probably would be the easiest for most people, and then set up an IRS.gov website, which honestly, maybe another topic for another, that's probably the hardest part, setting up an account on the IRS website. I had to do that recently, and it was more intense than I thought it would be. So the Roth conversion isn't the hardest part. It's setting up your online login, which I know is a shared thing for many.
Yeah. So kind of a highlight, I guess, are short form content people. You've got the simple way, doing tax withholding, sending that money directly to the IRS. Not necessarily as efficient, not as much money is getting over into Roth. Or we can do the estimated payment route, where we're moving all that money over to Roth, and then you're actually manually making that estimated payment. And there's kind of a lot of nuance around that, but I think it's generally kind of what we want to communicate to people, is that's how you take care of the tax side of things to make sure you're not in any trouble, not doing anything wrong. And it's still a great tool, and it's something I'm sure we'll talk more about. And as this database grows, there'll be more information on the whys and the whats and the hows of Roth conversions, because it's such an influential part of what we do with tax return driven financial planning. So we appreciate you guys following along. Check out the website, retirementtaxmatters.com. We've got some cool free resources on there. You trade your email address for some cool checklists and some things that you can have your eye on throughout the year to make sure you're following along as you're learning about this stuff. You're like, man, tax return driven financial planning, this is awesome. This is beneficial, and you guys can learn and grow alongside us. And as we build out the database, keep liking, subscribing, following all the different words, all the action verbs. Check us out on Spotify. Apple Music and on YouTube.
All right. So that sounds great, Adam.
All right. It's been a good one. We'll be back next week. This is Retirement Tax Matters. I'm Adam Reed. It's Garrett Crawford.
Thanks so much for listening to Retirement Tax Matters. As always, the ideas we share here are for educational purposes, and we do our best to get it right, but this isn't a substitute for specific tax or financial advice, because a truly effective strategy is always built around your personal situation. For more resources and to see our full disclosure, visit us at retirementtaxmatters.com.